Farmlings, who do you think is the most overrated player in Counter-Strike history? I'll wait a couple seconds. Now, I'm pretty sure a bunch of different names just came up, and while some players might have more people thinking they're overrated than others, this is a very hard question to actually try and answer because you can't really get an objective one. In order to actually find out who the most overrated player in Counter-Strike history is, we would need to find a public perception graph, compare it to a server output graph, and see where the public perception and server output lines are furthest apart. But we don't have that, and that would be incredibly hard to do. So I decided to do something a little bit easier. I asked the entire Garmour Discord along with a multitude of other creators to all give me their opinions on who they think the most overrated player in Counter-Strike history is. And after tallying up all the votes, it came out to 4 players. Electronic, Nico, Zantares, and Shroud were the overwhelming favorites of everyone that I asked. So today we are going to look at these 4 players and break down all of their cases as to why they might be the most overrated player in Counter-Strike history. Having to do with Electronic, the people in the Discord had this to say. The first submission said he had his moments, but he just keeps getting opportunities and not only wasting them, but destroying them. This is fair. In my Electronic video, I do call him out for being kind of a team killer, especially in CS2. You know, this take does make sense. Another reason was on the Na'Vi team where he pretty consistently was the number 2 best player on the team, but has destroyed and not performed on multiple teams afterwards. This is kind of similar to the first one. He's getting knocked a lot for destroying Cloud9, destroying VP, and by the looks of it, also kind of cooking BC game, but you know, maybe that will eventually work out. It doesn't look good to start, but a lot of the knocks on Electronic is him just kind of being a bad teammate and a team killer. The next one is Blaney with Aura plus never did anything not with Simple. Was Electronic a simple merchant? I mean, who's to say? And the last response on the Discord for Electronic was, hasn't done anything special since Na'Vi. His toxic IGL style has torn apart 3 teams since leaving, and the only time he was fragging at a reasonable rate was when he was being managed by Boomich, the greatest IGL of all time. Okay, buddy, okay. And along with all of this, we did have one of the creators actually submit Electronic as their vote. Well, they actually had 2 players. LionHeartz is a fellow YouTuber. Everyone who, you know, submitted for this will be linked in the description if you want to go check him out. But when I asked him, he said, I think I got it down to 2 names. One of them is personal bias, and one of them is 100% overrated, no question. JKS and Electronic. JKS to this day is talked about like he could walk into a top 5 team and make them better. His fans insist he's not washed. Was a pivotal star level talent when he was on G2. He absolutely never was. He's just one of those guys who's always talked about as being better than his stats or eye test ever actually showed. As always, it's that smile, that goddamn smile. He's overrated as fuck. Now, the deal with JKS is I do think maybe as of today, he is slightly overrated. It hasn't seemed like he's really moved the needle at all since joining FlyQuest. His time on Liquid wasn't great. And he did actually get another submission from Nebula, who said, in the same vein, JKS, local heroes, but not near the level people claim they had. So was JKS kind of boosted because he was, you know, the best Australian player? Probably a little bit. I think it's fair to say maybe he was a little overrated. But this section isn't about JKS. LionHeart's reasoning for Electronic is that, well, Electronic was his biased pick. Undeniably one of the best aggro riflers in the end of CSGO history. Fantastic as the spearhead next to Simple, but his ego has ruined his career. The fact that Blade ever deluded him into thinking he can IGL has permanently broken his brain. He's like the Russell Westbrook of CS. He still thinks he's at his MVP level and that he can call while doing it. He was mid at C9, absolutely diabolical at VP, and ruined the team on his way out. Then he went and stole checks at BC game and somehow instantly made Simple worse. So it seems like the main problem with Electronic is people think that A, he is a simple merchant. He was only good on Na'Vi because Simple was there. And the biggest knock is his career in CS2 and kind of how he's destroyed teams, which I do think is fair, but I mean, can we really discredit everything he did in CSGO and say he's the most overrated? My main thoughts on it are kind of that Electronic at this point of his career is utterly washed. So, I mean, I feel like the nominations do make sense on a surface level, but I do think out of the 4 players that got the most votes, he is my least favorite favorite nomination. At this point of his career, he's been bad for around 2 years, with 2025 being his worst year in history. Along with this, not only is he mechanically cooked, he brings his teams down with him. Cloud9, VP, and even BC Game all got significantly worse with him on the roster. But the reason why I don't love him being called overrated at this point is I feel like going into 2026, everyone is kind of aware of this fact. Like I said earlier, being overrated and underrated is like a very, very fluid thing. Public perception of you can change, you know, within a few months. And I think the public perception of Electronic at this point is, yeah, he's washed. I don't think anyone would want him on their team. If someone saw an announcement of their favorite team signing Electronic, they would probably just break down in tears, like hands and knees bawling. If instead of Cobra Zera, Electronic was signed to Mongols as their new fifth, there's gonna be fucking riots everywhere. The country's gonna burn down to the ground. So as of today, I don't really think he's being overrated. Like, if there was a graph of public perception to actual server output, I would say the part where those two lines were the furthest apart is probably 2023. That is probably when Electronic was at his peak of being the most overrated that he's ever been. You know, this is kind of the time when he moved from Na'Vi to Cloud9, and Cloud9 is deemed as this unbelievable national Russian super team at this point. And I'd say he was still pretty overrated in 2024 when he moved over to VP, but not nearly as bad as 2023. Another issue is if we were only talking about CS2, I could totally see the argument for Electronic being the most overrated player, but we are talking about the entirety of Counter-Strike history, and I just simply can't discredit those 6 unbelievable years that he had on Na'Vi. I can't do it. I can't say that he's overrated after that. He was simply one of the greatest riflers to play the game, and even though he's been in a slow, toxic decline the past few years, that fact doesn't really change. And it's not like he was a one-year wonder either. His prime was longer than Olaf Meister and Cold Zera's was. The number 4 player in 2018, the number 6 player in 2019, the number 5 player in 2020, and the number 7 player in 2021. That is a damn good 4-year stretch. Plus, he does have a major win and a billion other tournament wins. And while I do feel like LionHeartz kind of already said most of that, he does understand the fact that he was unbelievable in CSGO. So I think he is more just saying that in CS2, Electronic is the most overrated, which I feel like definitely could be argued. And oh yeah, also going over the point that Electronic was just a simple merchant. He was only good because Simple was the best player in the world. I don't really, I don't know. Me personally, I don't love that argument. I feel like, first of all, how do you even really measure that? He was phenomenal on Flipside before joining Na'Vi, and obviously being on a team with Simple and getting all the space that he gets because Simple is so good is going to be helpful, but like, does it really matter? Was Gronk a Tom Brady merchant? I guess. Was KD a Steph Curry merchant? I mean, kind of. Is Kerrigan a lose in the grand finals of CS2 major merchant? Yeah, but like, I don't think that takes away from any of these players' greatness. So overall, I think Electronic's career in CSGO was so unbelievably good. I don't love his nomination here, but if we're talking CSGO only, I feel like it does make sense. Barmlings, have you been looking for a quick and easy way to cash out your Counter-Strike skins? Maybe you've just recently gotten the I need a new knife now itch. Well, look no further than today's sponsor, skins.com. Skins.com has a huge marketplace of skins that you can easily navigate through using their super simple search filter system. You can capitalize on some of the best rates in the entire industry with payment methods such as crypto, card, Apple Pay, PayPal, and more. Or if you want to get out of the skin game, they also have an instant sell feature. But this is unlike any one in the market. Normally, the site will take a fairly large chunk just for the convenience of you instantly being able to cash out, but skins.com gives you incredibly fair prices along with 0% fees, allowing you to keep every single cent. You can then easily withdraw with crypto or bank transfer. And along with all of this, they're even working on adding a peer-to-peer trading system in the near future. Thank you to skins.com for sponsoring. Check them out with the link in the description. And back to the video. Now, before we get on to Nico, I kind of want to talk about who Quacke said he thought was the most overrated. And it's because he listed about 8 players, and I think every single one is interesting. Once again, his stuff will also be linked down below. But he said you could go with Nealon, Fasher, or Esatag as players who somehow got many chances at a high level despite being nothing special or outright crap. People talked about Nealon like he was the next great CIS IGL, and somehow he got onto EG and Gamer Legion because of it, but today he's more or less irrelevant. This honestly is true. I think he genuinely was partially overrated because of his look, okay? He had the glasses nerd look and people said, holy shit, this guy's, he's gotta be a genius. I do think there is some merit to that. He was pretty unbelievably overrated during that time. Of course, now as of today, he's fairly irrelevant, so this is a fair take. He then goes on to say Fasher, same story. Bird from Sky made him look like a god on Ecstatic, but he was dog water on Fnatic and OG, and now he just tweets about crypto. Also a fair take. Then he says, Esatag was decent on Heroic. His stock got pumped into oblivion on Astralis. Obviously, very notably bought for gazillions by Cloud9, then Complexity for some reason, then NIP in a proper disaster class of a career. But to be fair, I think most people think he's shit today, so. Now, I would say my favorite out of this list is Nealon, just because I do think Nealon was grossly overrated. He was a young, new genius IGL, and he had the glasses. But Esatag, in my opinion, is also another great one. He got so many chances on, like, tier 1 teams. I cannot believe how long he was floating around because of, like, 4 good maps. So I think around that time, like, especially organizations did heavily overrate him. But, like, Fasher 2 is a good one. All good. But then he goes on to say, my hot take is probably Fiflaren. Some Swedes might be angry about this one. Dude did basically nothing on the prime NIP roster, but kind of just tagged along the GOAT roster to success. But again, I think most people think he's shit, so maybe not the best pick. My honest take is tabseN and MSL are so fucking overrated, it's insane. Both are heralded as some sort of old school genius IGLs, despite neither having been relevant since 2018 to 2020, and neither ever being that good. But most people still think MSL was some sort of genius for winning one trophy against Astralis. People are starting to come around on tabseN though, to realize he's shit, so my real final pick for someone I think is grossly overrated is MSL. A lot of good picks here. I think tabseN kind of suffers from like the JKS treatment, where he's just been in the German scene forever, and through a majority of his time, he was a very good player for, you know, big. So I do think he is partially overrated just because he's been around for so long, and he's probably Germany's best ever player, at least in CSGO, and I guess, I mean, he hasn't been great in CS2, but throughout a majority of CSGO. So I think that's fair. MSL, on the other hand, I got mixed feelings at MSL. I always thought MSL was good, you know, just because of what he did on North. Basically, it was just a leftover scraps of Denmark. I always thought he did a pretty good job with North. Of course, he didn't have a ton of success, but, you know, I don't know, man. I can't really tell you about MSL because I never thought he was that overrated, but the reasoning is fair. I get it. Anyways, now on to Nico. There was not a single creator who said they thought Nico was overrated. This was just entirely voted on by the Discord, and I'm just gonna get it out of the way. He gets pounded because he hasn't won a major. That's pretty much the main reason. Okay, I'm not dumb. I know Nico is mechanically fucking good, but how can you be a part of 2 super teams and still do not have a major? I think he's good, but he's a choker, and that seals it for me. If we want to compare him to actually good riflers like Donk and Robs, they don't have a choke factor, and they don't have half the experience Nico has. Next is consistently not delivering on the biggest stage despite being the best rifler of all time. Complete failure on building a winning roster in both G2 and Falcons with an almost limitless budget. He's old, and his past achievements are carrying him, so people overrate him. As the biggest m0NESY glazer, I am tired of seeing a guy who has not been consistent since 2021 hold my goat back. In 22, 23, 24, I don't think you could call him a top 3 rifler despite the stats because of his bad performances in big games. m0NESY has been far more impactful in the last 4 years, and that is with Operas overall having a downturn in performance, especially since the start of CS2. On G2, m0NESY had 4 MVPs to Nico's 1. In 2025, it's 2-1 in favor of m0NESY. I don't expect that to change. To make an NFL comparison, a lot of people will compare Nico to Aaron Rodgers. Horrible comparison, by the way, okay? My boy Aaron Rodgers at least got 1 bowl. Don't even put them in the same sentence, bro. But that is not even close. He is more similar to Philip Rivers. I think that's a bad comparison as well, to be honest. And will continue to waste m0NESY's career. I'd say the best NFL comparison for Nico is like Lamar Jackson, maybe. Multiple MVP winner, phenomenal individually. But, you know, Lamar Jackson is kind of a choke artist when it comes to playoff games. So I feel like Lamar Jackson and Nico is the best comparison for me. But, you know, to each their own. Was he a good rifler? Yes. But people trying to even compare him to Donk is crazy. I like Fraudco, and he is a good player, but no major. Also, I just wanted to have a hot take. So, yeah, a lot of people are saying Nico is overrated, mostly just because he hasn't won a major. To be fair, do I agree? No, not at all. But I do get the argument because a lot of people's legacy literally just comes down to major success. Like, that's how it is. That's why I glaze majors so much, and I say, you know, the rest of the entire season is like, it's important, obviously, but it's just, it doesn't compare to a major. It's what everyone remembers for the most part. And that's why Nico's story is so tragic. because he has been so good throughout his career. He's been so good for so long. The fact that he's been good for a decade is unbelievable, but major success unfortunately trumps all. Like, it is what it is. But like, do you guys understand how different his entire legacy would be, his entire public perception would be if FaZe just don't lose 15-11 versus Cloud9? Like, they needed to win one round and he fucking had it, man. He would have had it. And I'm happy they lost, okay? That Cloud9 win was one of the greatest moments of my life. But just the fact that one round there, and even in overtime, there was multiple times where FaZe could have pulled ahead and taken it, and they just never did. That one moment could have changed everything for Nico's public perception. It's unbelievable. Along with this, after being placed number 18 in the 2025 top 20, he now has the most top 20 appearances of any player in Counter-Strike history. I think this is incredibly impressive, especially as a rifler through 2 different games. Most of these players who are up there next to him are all oppers, just because, you know, if you're an opper, you're the star player of the team. Of course, you're going to make the top 20 more often. So the fact that he has done this for a decade straight as a rifler is so unbelievably impressive. And if you look at the players all under him who have like 9, 8, 7 top 20 appearances, major winner, major winner, major winner, major winner, and oh hey, his former teammate that will also never be a major winner due to Cloud9. Elige, who is also kind of in the same boat. But then the next 13 players in a row are all major winners. I mean, this list of players who has appeared on the HLTV top 20 a bunch of times is just filled to the brim with major winners. But then all the way at the top, you have Nico, who is just, he just can't do it, man. We can even put this into numbers, okay? Here's a stat for you. If you've appeared in the HLTV top 20 at least 3 times in your career, there is a 71% chance that you've won a major. Not really sure, you know, how much that means. I just thought it was cool to figure out the actual number. Nico has 3 times the top 20 appearances. That the bar to entry for this stat is like, it's unbelievable he hasn't won one yet. And I mean, like, a part of the reason why there is some merit to the Nico being overrated take is he was fighting for his life on Maus, right? But since he has left Maus, buddy's had help. He's had a hell of a lot of help on a lot of these teams. You know, FaZe was a dominant super team until they imploded. Strangely, the only major final he made with G2 is when he had the weakest iteration of that roster. So maybe we do just gotta throw Nico into some tier 2 team and just watch him try to hard carry it. Maybe that's just when he has the most success. But then, of course, after that major run, he got m0NESY and various other great riflers on the team to play with, and now what is supposed to be the big bad super team of this scene in Falcons, and he just hasn't really done anything with any of these teams major wise. Now, a part of this reason could be just seemingly his inability to work with other great IGLs. I don't know exactly what the reasoning behind this is. Maybe he just, I don't know, man, maybe he calls more than the IGLs want him to on like CT and T sides. He just wants to take control of the game more, and the IGLs just can't really do their job as much. I don't know. But like, Nico and Karrigan didn't really work. Karrigan wins a major without him. Him and Alexi B don't work. Alexi then goes on to win a major without him. Him and Snacks didn't really work. And then Snacks goes in a time machine to go back a decade and wins a major without him. I mean, what is going on here, guys? So this really comes down to, is Nico the most unlucky player in Counter-Strike history, or is he the problem? I'm gonna be honest here, fellas. More oftentimes than not, I'm gonna blame the player over being unlucky. I'm not really a believer in just being unlucky for, you know, a decade. So if he is, you know, the problem, should he be considered overrated? Like I said earlier, in my opinion, no, I don't think so. You can still be an all-time great without the biggest trophy, even though it does hurt quite a bit. You know, like, it's quite a big ding on that resume. I get that. And sure, you can say, like, his flaws have not helped him throughout his career. He is a part of the problem as to why he can't reach the top of the mountain in Counter-Strike. But at the end of the day, he's still fucking Nico, man. He's done literally everything else in the game that there is to do, pretty much. It's not like he forces his team to crumble at every tournament. He's won Cologne, he's won Kato, he's won various other huge tier 1 events. He's made major final runs. It just wasn't meant to be, I guess. I don't know, man. There is just something about major specifically that doesn't allow him to get over the hump. Anyways, all that yap to say, my main argument against him being overrated is there just wouldn't be a chance in the world he would even be in this conversation if FaZe just wins one round up 15-11. That's pretty much it. 8 years ago at Boston could have changed everything in his career. Like, it's genuinely unbelievable. The butterfly effect of this stuff. You choke, you don't win one round, and I mean, he hasn't really had a chance since then. Like, of course, he made the final with G2, but I don't really think in any universe G2, even if they go to a map 3, wins that series. I mean, Na'Vi was unbelievable during that time. I guess you can always go back and say maybe. I don't know, man. I don't love his chances there. But yeah, the entire case for Nico is like, sure, he can be a problem at majors. Has, you know, I guess mental issues with that, but that's pretty much the entire argument, is he just hasn't won a major, and I just don't think that's enough to say he's the most overrated player in Counter-Strike history. Now, before we get into Xantares, I want to talk about what KingT decided to say, because it's a controversial one, and we'll see. KingT said, Fallen is the obvious choice. All I can do is pray for his DMs at this point, but listen to his reasoning. He was a mid-caller at best for 6-ish years and a bad opper just as long. Yet the whole world leaps to his defense and overlooks it once he's winning again. Cadian would literally be killed for that kind of run. For a spicier take, olofmeister gets given tons of credit for essentially 18 months of carry level play and then just being a support. He's been lapped by most modern greats. Now, I respect the fuck out of him for these takes, because I do see where he's coming from. Fallen was pretty washed and pretty mediocre for quite a long time. I think that's not crazy to say. Do I think you can overlook how unbelievably good he was as a caller and as an opper for, you know, the couple years during the Luminosity SK Prime? No, I don't. Plus, I love him coming back and, like, Furia being a phenomenal team during this past, I guess, second half of the year. I don't know, man. I feel like he was getting, like, deservedly kind of shit on. A lot of people were calling for him to be replaced on Furia before they started playing much better and he switched over to being a rifler. So, like, I don't know, man. I mean, do I disagree? Yes, but like I do see where he's coming from. And then the olofmeister take, I think actually I kind of like more, because olofmeister is an all-time great player, okay? If you ever place #1 in the HLTV top 20, you are going to be remembered forever. It's just how it is. You have to be so incredibly good to hit that #1 spot. You know, he's also a multiple-time major winner, so I feel like olofmeister does get glazed reasonably, but he really wasn't that good for that long. It was really 18 months of him being an incredibly good player. He then did have that wrist injury, which I think did kind of fuck with him quite a bit. That entire situation is kind of just unfortunate for him, but he did kind of take a back seat when he went on to join FaZe, and then he kind of just eventually was phased out until he was benched. So his prime wasn't super long, so I think you can ding him for that, but his peak was also unbelievable. So it's, you know, I don't know, man. Very interesting takes, though. The case for Xantares being overrated is very similar to the case for Nico. He is seemingly a phenomenal mechanical player. He puts up great numbers, but he hasn't really won anything. Is the star player of his team, very good individually, but has won 0 notable events. You can blame the team / calling, but other players managed to succeed where Xantares hasn't. Might be a little controversial. Xantares is literally the worst player in history. Okay. We don't have to go that far. Has not won a single trophy except a tier 1.5 PGL Masters Bucharest and then online events with Big. They constantly throw games and it disgusts me. Cheers. Xantares is perhaps the most overrated player of all time. This is not based on his individual mechanical skill. This is based on the fact that he is not a winner. He is a loser. He has been around forever at this point, and there was always talk about how his teams let him down, but at some point, surely we have to talk about his personality and ability to play the game rather than just to shoot heads. I feel like someone like Simple, who is super toxic but able to carry his team all alone to literal championships, is 1 in a million. Xantares is equally as toxic as Simple, but not as skilled. He can do above average in the server, maybe 2 entry kills onto the site. It doesn't go unnoticed. He is an above average player, but the Turkish scene treats him like he is a god. His ratings are good enough, but I can't remember a single highlight of his. I also feel like a lot of his rating is inflamed by farming some of the lower tier teams, and once it gets to real opposition, he can often hit a wall. He has good aim, don't get me wrong, but nothing a Mezzi or a Malbs couldn't pull off. Every time an important game comes around, playoffs, big qualification, etc., I feel like he disappears into the ether and has next to no impact. Group stage merchant who can't get it done when it counts. I like watching him play well, but people say he's so amazing even when he chokes the second they are on stage. Great player, but is so overrated due to the Xantares peak. I see people on TikTok and YouTube shorts putting this guy into all-time rifler talks, which is low-key crazy. He's put into talks with the best riflers ever when his peak isn't even making him a top 3 rifler currently. He's a really good player, but I fear the casual community overrates him. For how long he's he's been considered a top player, there's very little evidence outside of rating and trophies from an online era with Big, during which he won 4 events, only 1 S tier at DreamHack Master Spring 2020, but only got 1 MVP at a B tier DreamHack Summer, defeating number 42 Endpoint, number 9 Complexity, and number 19 Heroic twice as the best team in the world. His only other MVP came a couple months ago at his first LAN trophy in Bucharest, where Aurora were the highest seed at the tournament, featuring only 1 other top 10 team in 3D Max. So far, his only HLTV top 20 placement was last year at number 16, and then I mean he did get placed in the top 20 again this year. I feel like I've heard his name for a decade as one of the most mechanically talented players, but where are his accolades? Only 1 tier 1 LAN win in over 10 years of playing, never did anything in CSGO, and still fell off in CS2. Turkish. So I feel like Zantares is kind of like a better example of being overrated than Nico. He's literally just Nico, but on steroids, overrated wise. Like, Nico has done everything besides won a major, and Zantares is also mechanically incredibly gifted as a rifler, but he has just not really done anything in the scene. You know, in his decade-long career, before winning the tier 1.5 Bucharest trophy, he had 0 LAN trophies in his, you know, he's been playing for 10 years, man, or damn near. So I do think there is actually a bit of an argument here. Zantares is a great Counter-Strike player. I don't think I'm arguing this. I don't think anyone is really arguing that he's not mechanically great, but I do think there is a special amount of PR going his way just because of the Zantares peak kind of blowing up in what was it, 2020? And along with that, it's kind of like what I talked about earlier. If you're the best player from a country, you're gonna get propped up a lot, like a JKS, kind of like a Tabson from Germany. You're gonna get glazed a little extra if you're the best player from a certain country. But I do honestly feel like even more than that, the Zantares peak just boosted his stock so much. And I mean, like, this hasn't stuck as much as the Zantares peak, but also like him being the Turkish Terminator. Also, you know, nicknames do have an effect. Public perception when they hear the Turkish Terminator, they're like, oh my god, like, this guy's got to be an animal, which he is, but you know, like the people said, he doesn't really have the accolades to back it up. And I feel like the Zantares peak kind of boosted him from being looked at as a very, very good rifler to people thinking he's one of the best riflers in the world, which I just don't think is true. And even like as of today, as of this second in 2026, I don't think you can put him top 5. You could maybe squeak him into top 10, but I think that's even a little much. And I feel like a lot of people would consider him, you know, a top 3 rifler in the world, which I just don't think you can really argue that. So let's just kind of go back and see how good he really was during his time playing in CSGO. From 2014 to 2018, Zantares was a freak, okay? This, like, he was unbelievable. Space Soldiers was a tier 2 national Turkish team, but despite them kind of being a tier 2 national team, he was still a freak, putting up unbelievable numbers. In his 4 years there, he has a 1.2 rating on LAN against top 20 opposition. At big events, it does go down to a 1.10, but that is still really good considering his team's performance. A lot of times they didn't really stand a chance against, you know, the better teams in the world. So I'd say Buddy was doing really all that he could. When you look at them against top 10 teams at big events, he's literally the only positive player on the entire team, and it isn't really close. After this 4-year stint on Space Soldiers, he tried to free himself and join Big, but I think this is where we learned what Zantares' biggest flaw as a player is. You know, I personally haven't spoken to the guy, but from what we've seen during his years of playing, it seems like he is not very comfortable speaking in English and playing on international teams because he didn't play great on Big. And maybe it isn't that, maybe it's just that he played different roles on the team and didn't have as much freedom as he did on Space Soldiers, but he took a pretty big dip in form after leaving and joining Big. Like, it is a weird time with COVID, but we do have a full year in 2019 of normal play, and during this year on LAN, he posted a 1.04, which kind of just puts him in the middle of the pack on the team. Against top 20, this then drops to a 0.96, and he kind of just turned into a mediocre player on this team. He went from being a star, unbelievable player on Space Soldiers to being meh on Big, which honestly is kind of strange because it was around this time that the Zantares peak really started to gain traction. After this stint on Big, he would then return to Turkey with a national team in Eternal Fire, and almost immediately he would go back to being the unbelievable player that he was on Space Soldiers. Now he was even better at big events with a 1.2 and a 1.19 against top 20 teams. Now it did help that this EF team was infinitely better than Space Soldiers was, and he did have much more support around him during this time. But yeah, no, he returns to a local Turkish team, and he is just back to being a freak. Since he's been on this team, they've been pretty solid. Like, a lot of the times they've been pretty close to being a top 5 team in the world. Their biggest issue is they do kind of struggle at majors, especially in 2025. But I mean, in 20 2024, he was unbelievable, to be honest. Especially when you look at his stats during majors in 2024. He's literally a top 3 player in the world. Xantares is a case where he is mechanically great and he can put up unbelievable numbers, but I do think he is slightly overrated due to the Xantares peak and just kind of the PR that comes with that, because I feel like a lot of casuals will feel that he is a top 3 rifler in the world just simply because they heard of the Xantares peak. And well, I just feel like at no point was he ever that good. He's great, but not, you know, world-changing, best player in the world type player. At points, was he top 20? Absolutely. But I don't know, man. I think the concern about him not really having the accolades as well is fair, but also kind of explainable. His need to have to play in a national Turkish team has hurt him quite a bit. Space Soldiers never really had a chance with the players on that team, and EF does have good players, but not really good enough to compete with international powerhouse teams like Vitality and FaZe for, you know, a good chunk of 2024. Na'Vi, Falcons, and I mean, Donk. These teams more often than not are just gonna have the upper hand, and maybe if Xantares was more comfortable playing in international teams, this would be a completely different story. Maybe he would have the accolades to back up his rating, but it is just really hard to beat international powerhouse teams when you are a national roster. Like, I mean, look at Mongols. They are incredible and made the finals of the Austin Major, but the only one true tier 1 tournament they've ever won is Esports World Cup, and that was against Eternal Fire and Xantares. You know, we flipped that script and, oh look, now it's Aurora, who's the big national team, with the tier 1 tournament win, and you know, Mongols might still not have one. But yeah, all this to say, I do agree that Xantares is slightly overrated, mostly due to the Xantares peak and the PR that brought him. And before we get into the final player that I'm going to talk about, I do want to read a submission from Vu. You guys probably know who Vu is. And well, he said, easy answers are Shroud and Scream, but they've been called overrated so many times, I think they might at this point be correctly graded. I think the true answer is someone that is actually great, but people try to act like they're the best of all time when they're actually only really good. So what he's about to say doesn't mean he thinks this player is bad, but he doesn't think they're the GOAT and they're just a very good player. And the example he gave was Glaive. Won some majors with one roster and everyone acts like he invented utility and we were living in the Stone Age beforehand. The timeless quote from the 2000s from Brian Big Dog Ray comes to mind. If Moto is a god for figuring out that since you can't run and shoot and bullets aren't accurate, that you need to shoot 2 guns at their 1 and use grenades more, I don't know what to say to the community. Get a brain? And then he's saying just replace Moto with Glaive. So I'm assuming his take is that Kerrigan is the GOAT IGL and Glaive just isn't, because he was only ever good with that one Astralis roster and didn't have a lot of success anywhere else, which I do think you can make an argument that maybe Glaive is a little overrated. I think it's honestly an incredibly interesting take, and you could have, you know, I honestly you could probably make an entire video about Glaive being the most overrated player of all time, but I don't know, man. There is something about Kerrigan being the caller on Astralis and then Glaive coming in and then them kind of, I mean, I guess not immediately, but breaking over that ceiling that it seemed like Astralis had to not be the best and just be very good. Glaive did kind of turn them into the best team of all time, but the point still stands that, you know, he is, I guess, right. Glaive didn't invent utility, but tactically wise, Astralis were a step above every other single team in the scene. Maybe compared to today, it wouldn't be as unbelievable, but I mean, Prime Astralis was something to be marveled at, man. So I don't know. I think I understand the take and where he's coming from, but I struggle to discredit what he did on Astralis. I guess maybe the player that put them over the edge was Magisk, because they really started their era after Magisk joined. So maybe, I don't know, maybe there was an argument there, but yeah, that's Vu's take. Now, the player who was tied for the most votes with Xantares was Shroud, but I did want to talk about him last because while Xantares was all people from the Discord, Shroud was the overwhelming favorite of all of the content creators that I asked. Nebula listed like 47,000 players, but at the end, he finally decided to go with Shroud. When he was talking about local heroes and listing JKS, he said Shroud too. Actually, it's probably Shroud, and people were saying he was one of the best in NA back in 2015/16. Then I also asked Mauisnake, and Maui also had to take that it's probably Shroud. Obviously a solid pro player that showed glimpses, but the public perception of him now, mostly his Twitch viewer base, far exceeds his accomplishment. This goes back to the graph of, you know, public perception and actual server output, and I think that's a fair take. We also have another Nebula, okay? There's 2 Nebula content creators, but he said a trillion billion % Shroud without a doubt. We're good at CSGO 10 years ago, and now he's saying you should use the same brand mouse pad and mouse, otherwise you're throwing. I wonder who sponsors his mouse and mouse pad. there's personal beef there, it seems like. And the Discord responses to Shroud was this: everyone, especially across other esports, talks about him like he was the second coming. Counter-Strike fans, I believe, are more rational. That as someone that has followed many FPS esports, the Shroud glaze is insane. He was solid but never elite in my opinion, when he gets talked about as if he was Donk in his prime. For only overrated in the CSGO scene, give me Tabsin. Another Tabsin mention. After he became popular on Twitch, people looked at his rank S online match clips and thought he was some kind of beast in CSGO prior to retiring, when he is probably not even in the top 15 NA players of all time. Is this even a question? I can best put it as people having some sort of Mandela effect surrounding his career. Would have been largely forgotten if not for his content creation. He would consistently dominate in NA and people outside of the top 20, but when it came to the best of the best, he would struggle. He had decent mechanics, but not superstar level. He didn't have a good understanding of the game and yet was constantly worshipped by NA. He wasn't even the best on his team at the time, my brother in Christ. So, you know, a lot of anti-Shroud believers. He is basically Xantares, but a significantly shorter time at his peak. Xantares has been really good for a decade, and I think Shroud's peak was like 2 or 3 years, but I feel like he is talked about as being better than Xantares simply because of his Twitch audience and his rank S clips. Now, he did have, you know, an S tier LAN over Xantares, that is true, but Xantares throughout his career has put up significantly better numbers. Throughout his entire career, he has a 1.16 against top 20 teams on LAN, and Shroud has a 0.99 against top 20 teams on LAN. Certainly it can be worse, but I feel like a lot of people do talk about him like he has the Xantares numbers. He has the 1.2s on against top 20 teams on LAN. So I do feel like Shroud is the strongest contender that I have talked about so far. It kind of makes sense when you really think about it. I feel like when you hear people talk about Shroud as this FPS god and he is the best at every game he touches, and back in the day you look at these generational pug clips, like they were pretty phenomenal clips.
This is what I'll say. The shit that Shroud could do in CS, Simple can never do. That's what I'll say.
Wait, what?
Simple's very good at taking.
Stupid. You're stupid.
Simple is very good at taking 1v1s. Shroud is equally as good in my opinion, but the multi-fragging potential with Shroud is way higher with him. Like if multiple guys are on your screen, Shroud has a chance of killing them way better than Simple. Why? Because I've seen him do it.
That's literally an Andrew Tate take right there.
And after that, you know, Freakazoid also tweets this. It's a little much, okay? When we're comparing Buddy to Simple, I think we gotta come back down to earth a little bit. You know, I feel like back in the day, people were arguing that Shroud mechanically is the best player this game has ever seen. And well, if he wasn't that unbelievably insane against top 20 teams, to me that means that if he was really that good mechanically, he just was the most incomplete player of all time. Because how can you not at least be above average if you are, you know, a top 3 mechanical player? You must just have such little understanding of every other single aspect of the game that's holding you back. Like, I feel like he's just talked about that. Mechanically, Shroud will put you in the fryer, but the poor guy is just like a caveman. He doesn't understand what positioning is. What is a positioning? I feel like my main argument for this is that, like, a true generationally transcendent, mechanically gifted player would be able to overcome his shortcomings and still be really, really good at the top level. Like, I'm not saying the other aspects of his game are bad by any means, but I feel like a good example of this is Donk. He is such a mechanical freak. I've never seen anyone else in my entire life make spraying an AK look so smooth that it has just propelled him into being this absolute demon and freak. And like I said, I don't think the other aspects of his game are bad, but he is so mechanically good that I feel like he could just not know anything else and it wouldn't even matter. But yeah, I think the biggest issue with Shroud is he is one of the biggest streamers in the world, and it's literally just the Xantares peak on crack. When you are that big of a streamer and are just honestly that good at so many different FPS games, you're gonna get glazed through the roof. A great example of this is XQC as well. I personally always thought XQC was the best Overwatch player in history. Like, there was XQC as an Overwatch pro, and then there was a gap. I thought Buddy was the GOAT, but that's also because I've never watched a single game of professional Overwatch in my entire life. And I thought, like, a part of the reason he became such a big streamer is because he was the best player in the world. And well, after looking into it a little bit, it seems like that's a bit of a stretch. He was an incredibly good player, but best is, it's a little too much. It seems like he was the best Winston in North America, but not really close to even the best tank tank player in the world. And I mean, when you look at this comparatively, I feel like Shroud's kind of in the same boat. Like, I could totally see how people who have never watched Counter-Strike think Shroud is like a top 10 player of all time, and maybe even right behind Simple all time, you know? Like, I don't know how far this stuff goes, all just because he is this huge streamer, and I mean, the PR that comes with that is unbelievable. Launders kind of made a video talking about Shroud, and I think here he talks about something incredibly interesting. Like we kind of talked about earlier, it sounds like Shroud was incredibly limited as a professional Counter-Strike player, and when looking at his clips from C9, like, it does seem like he was mechanically great. His crosshair placement, his micro adjustments, like, his small little flicks were really impressive. But when this is your whole package, teams and players are gonna start taking advantage of this. And I feel like also, like, the type of player he was very visually appealing to watch, so that also is gonna contribute to him being slightly overrated. You know, how quick he was, the flicks, crosshair placement, like I said, he does look like an insane player. And he was good. I don't want to say Shroud was horrible. He just unfortunately wasn't very complete. And I think due to this, due to his immense following on Twitch gassing him up, due to Freakazoid comparing him to Simple, I will, sadly, in my opinion, I think I gotta have Shroud as my most overrated player in Counter-Strike history. Yeah, I think that's it for me. Thank you to everyone in the Discord who, you know, took the time to submit who they thought it was and also give reasoning with it, along with all of the creators, Mauisnake, LionHeartz, KingT, Vu, both Nebulas, Quacke. I mean, I appreciate all of you fellas. And why don't you let me know down in the comments who you guys think the most overrated player is. Like I keep saying, if there was a graph of a line of public perception and a line of actual output on the server, that's how you would measure who the most overrated player is, but we just don't have that. So all we really have is public perception and your opinion. That's the only reason we can figure out what the public perception even is, if you guys all share your opinions. So tell me if you agreed with any of the creators, any of, you know, the Discord members, if you agree with me on it probably being Shroud, or if you do think it is someone else. And I mean, it is kind of different if we're talking about today, who the most overrated player in CS2 is, or all time. There's a lot of different factors. I think it's a really interesting topic because there isn't, you know, really one correct answer. All there really is opinions on the matter. But yeah, that's it for me, fellas. I hope you enjoyed. Subscribing if you want to subscribe, like if you liked the video, and notificationing if you want to be notified. And I will see you guys later.